I'm Nicholas. I'm 25 years old, and my own sister ruined my life to steal my inheritance. Before I tell you about the moment she confessed everything, right in front of our family's most important business partner, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It's good to know I'm not alone in this. The door slamming shut was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. It was more than just wood hitting a frame. It was the sound of my life ending. 1 minute, I was standing in the marble entryway of the house I grew up in. The next, I was on the cold stone porch, the night air biting at my skin through my thin dress shirt, with nothing but the clothes on my back and the wallet in my pocket. Inside, my father's roar still echoed in my ears. Martin's voice wasn't just loud. It was a physical force, the kind that made the fine crystal on the mantelpiece tremble. His face, just moments before, had been a mask of pure fury, veins standing out on his temples, his eyes burning with a righteous anger that was completely misplaced. Standing beside him, looking like a fragile doll, was my sister, Clara. Perfect, pretty Clara, with tears streaming down her flawlessly made-up face. They were perfect, crystalline tears, the kind that welled up on command but never, ever smudged her mascara. She had her hand on our father's arm, leaning on him for support, her body shaking with practiced sobs. "I can't believe you would do this to us, Nicholas," she'd whispered, her voice choked with fake anguish. "After everything we've given you." This she was referring to was $20,000. $20,000 missing from the company safe. A safe only 3 people had the combination to: my father, me, and her. And her story was simple. She'd seen me. She'd seen me sneaking around the office late last night. She didn't want to believe it, of course, but the money was gone, and I had been acting so distant lately. Every word was a perfectly sharpened knife. I tried to defend myself, my voice sounding weak and thin against my father's rage. "I didn't do it. Dad, you have to believe me. Clara is lying." My father just shook his head, a look of profound disappointment washing over his anger. It was a look I knew well. It was a look I'd been seeing my whole life. "A thief and a liar," he boomed. "You've brought shame to this family. Get out of my house. You are no longer my son." Clara's sobs intensified, but as my father turned his back on me to comfort her, her eyes met mine over his shoulder. The tears were still there, but the grief was gone. In its place was a cold, triumphant glint. A tiny, almost imperceptible smirk played on her lips before she buried her face in our father's shoulder. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep, and hauled me to the door. He threw it open and shoved me out into the darkness. "Don't come back until you're ready to admit what you did and apologize to your sister," he snarled, and then he slammed the door. That final, deafening sound sealed my fate. They had chosen to believe her lie. They had chosen her. But as I stood there, shivering on the porch, a different kind of fire started to burn in my gut. They had no idea this was just the beginning. To understand how a single, unsupported accusation could shatter my entire world in less than 10 minutes, you have to understand my sister. You have to understand the landscape of my family, a place where Clara was the sun, and I was just a planet caught in her orbit, surviving on whatever warmth was left over. It wasn't always a big, dramatic event like a theft. Most of the time, it was smaller. Death by 1,000 cuts. I remember when I was about 10, our grandmother, my dad's mom, had given our family a delicate, hand-painted porcelain vase. It was her mother's, an heirloom from the old country. It sat on the mantelpiece, untouched and revered. One afternoon, while my parents were out, Clara was throwing a ball in the house, something we were explicitly forbidden from doing. I warned her to stop. She just laughed, that tinkling, carefree sound that always charmed everyone, and threw it again. This time, it missed her hand on the rebound and smashed directly into the vase. The silence that followed was terrifying. Shards of painted porcelain lay scattered across the hearth. Before I could even process what had happened, Clara's face crumpled. The tears came instantly. By the time my parents' car pulled into the driveway, she was hysterical. Through her sobs, she spun a tale of how I'd been chasing her, how I'd gotten angry and thrown the ball at her, but it missed and hit the vase. I was speechless. The lie was so audacious, so complete. I denied it, of course, but my quiet, stunned denials were no match for her theatrical performance. My father's face hardened into that familiar mask of disappointment. I was grounded for a month. Clara got ice cream for being so brave. I learned a valuable lesson that day. In my family, the best story won, not the truth. A few years later, it was an idea. I was a teenager, obsessed with computers. I spent weeks designing a new inventory management system for our family's manufacturing company. It was rudimentary, but it was functional. I was proud of it. I made the mistake of showing it to Clara, explaining how it could save the company time and money. She seemed bored, nodding along before changing the subject. 2 weeks later, at a family dinner, she announced that she had a proposal for Dad. She presented my idea almost verbatim as her own. She'd even redrawn my rough sketches on clean paper. My father was floored. He called her a genius, a visionary. He talked about her future, her sharp business mind. When I tried to interject to say that it was my idea, my father held up a hand. "Don't be jealous of your sister's success, Nicholas. A little healthy competition is good for you." I felt invisible. He didn't even consider that I could have been telling the truth. The assumption was automatic. Clara was brilliant, and I was envious. The ultimate example was my 16th birthday. It was supposed to be my day. My parents had agreed to a small party in the backyard. That same afternoon, a letter arrived. It was an acceptance letter for Clara into a prestigious summer program for young leaders. A big deal for sure, but it could have waited. Instead, my mother interrupted my birthday cake ceremony to make the announcement. My small party was instantly transformed into a celebration of Clara's achievement. The rest of the evening, my father paraded her around to the relatives, beaming, talking about her bright future, her boundless potential. I stood by the grill, flipping burgers for my own party, feeling like a caterer at someone else's event. That was my place in the family. I was the supporting cast in the Clara show. After college, we both went to work for the family business Martin Manufacturing. It felt like the natural, expected path. My father had built it from the ground up, and the unspoken understanding was that one day, I would take over. The inheritance of the company was always framed as my birthright, my responsibility. But from the moment I stepped into that office, the old family dynamics just found a new corporate stage. I took a position in operations. I liked the nuts and bolts of the business, the logistics, the efficiency. I spent my days on the factory floor, learning the machinery, talking to the foreman, trying to find ways to make things run smoother. I put in the hours, often staying late to draft proposals and analyze production data. I believed that my hard work, my actual contributions, would finally force my father to see me as a capable adult, not just his screw-up son. Clara, on the other hand, waltzed into a marketing role she created for herself. She was brilliant at it, I had to admit. She was all about image, perception, and networking. While I was covered in grease trying to fix a jammed conveyor belt, she was at lunch with clients, her laughter echoing in expensive restaurants. She'd come back to the office with a signed contract, and my father would praise her for her killer instinct. My reports on improving production efficiency by 8% would earn me a grunt and a nod. "Good. Keep it up," was the highest praise I could expect. The disparity in our treatment was glaring. My salary was standard for an operations manager. Clara's was significantly higher, justified by commissions on deals that the company likely would have landed anyway. When I'd managed to save the company nearly $100,000 by renegotiating a contract with a steel supplier, my father's only comment was, "It's about time you started pulling your weight." A month later, Clara landed a feature in a local business journal, a glossy, 2-page spread about the fresh, new face of Martin Manufacturing. My father had it framed and hung in the lobby. The real friction started when our roles began to overlap. I proposed a major equipment upgrade. It was a huge capital investment, but my projections showed it would pay for itself within 3 years and dramatically increase our output. I spent weeks on the proposal, a 30-page document with detailed cost analysis and ROI calculations. I presented it to my father. He glanced at the executive summary and tossed it on his desk. Too much risk, son. We're doing fine as we are. Don't fix what isn't broken. 3 weeks later, in a senior management meeting, Clara presented her Q3 marketing and growth initiative. Tucked inside, it was a proposal for a strategic modernization of core assets. It was my equipment upgrade plan, repackaged with buzzwords and sleek graphics. She hadn't done any of the research. She'd just taken my data, given it a new name, and presented it as a small part of her grand vision. Brilliant, Clara, my father boomed, looking around the table. This is the kind of forward thinking we need. Proactive, not reactive. My jaw was on the floor. I looked at her, and she just gave me a small, saccharine smile. Later, I confronted her in the hallway. That was my proposal, Clara. She just shrugged, adjusting her blazer. It was a good idea, Nikki, but ideas are useless without the right packaging. You should know that by now. She patted my arm condescendingly and walked away. That was the moment I realized that it didn't matter what I did. I could invent a machine that turned lead into gold, and my father would still find a way to give her the credit. I wasn't just competing with her. I was competing with the story of her that my parents had written long ago. And in that story, I was never meant to be the hero. The final straw, the event that led directly to that slam door, started with a number on a spreadsheet. It was a discrepancy I found late one Tuesday night. I was cross-referencing our quarterly expense reports with the marketing department's budget, and something wasn't adding up. A significant amount of money had been allocated to a vendor I'd never heard of for promotional services that were suspiciously vague. It took me 2 days of quiet digging to unravel it. The vendor was a shell company, and the payments were being authorized by Clara. It wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping. It was embezzlement, plain and simple. Not on a massive scale, but it was systematic. A few thousand here, a few thousand there, funneled out of the marketing budget over the last 6 months. The total was right around $20,000. My first feeling wasn't anger, but a profound sense of dread. This was it. This was the proof. This wasn't a subjective argument about who had the better idea or who broke a vase. This was black and white. Numbers on a page. Bank records. It was undeniable. My plan was simple. I would gather all the evidence, the invoices, the payment authorizations with her signature, the proof that the vendor didn't exist, and present it to my father privately. I wasn't trying to destroy her. I just wanted the truth to finally, for once, be heard. I wanted him to see what I saw. I wanted him to finally realize who his golden child really was. I naively believed that the facts would be enough. I spent all of Wednesday night compiling the file, my hands shaking slightly as I printed out each document. This felt like the most important moment of my professional life. It was bigger than any promotion. It was about justice. What I didn't know was that Clara was smarter, faster, and far more ruthless than I could have imagined. She must have known the financial audit was coming up. She must have sensed that her little scheme was about to be exposed. She didn't wait for me to make my move. She launched a preemptive strike. She knew about the cash that was sometimes kept in the main office safe for emergency expenses. She knew I had the combination. All she had to do was take the money, hide it, and point the finger at the person everyone was already conditioned to see as the less competent, more resentful sibling. Me. She wasn't just covering her tracks. She was eliminating her only real rival in one fell swoop. So, on Thursday morning, I walked into my father's office, my folder of evidence tucked under my arm, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and vindication. I was ready to present my case, but I never got the chance. The moment I stepped through the door, I saw him standing there, his face like a thundercloud, and beside him, crying, was Clara. The trap had already been sprung. I had walked right into it, armed with a truth that nobody was prepared to hear. The game was over before I even knew I was playing. The engine of my 10-year-old sedan was a low, sad rumble in the otherwise silent night. I was parked in the deserted lot of a 24-hour supermarket, the neon sign casting a sickly green glow on my dashboard. The adrenaline from the confrontation had worn off, leaving behind a cold, heavy emptiness that felt like it was physically weighing me down. I leaned my head against the steering wheel, the cheap plastic cool against my forehead. Homeless. At 25, I was homeless. The word felt foreign, like something that happened to other people in stories, not to me. I had a college degree. I had a job. My wallet contained $67 and a few credit cards that I knew would soon be useless once my father cut me off from the joint accounts. My mind kept replaying the scene at the door, the look in Clara's eyes, the sound of my father's voice. It was a carousel of betrayal that I couldn't get off. After an hour of just sitting there, letting the despair wash over me, a sliver of irrational hope pushed through. My mother, Eleanor. She had been silent during the whole ordeal, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She was always the peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth things over. Maybe, without my father's overwhelming presence, I could get through to her. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over her contact photo. I took a deep breath and pressed call. It rang 3 times, each ring tightening the knot in my stomach. Nicholas. Her voice was a fragile whisper. Mom, I said, relief flooding through me. Mom, you have to listen to me. Clara set me up. I have proof. She's been stealing from the company. I found it, and she did this to cover it up. I was speaking too fast, the words tumbling over each other. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear her muffled sob. Oh, Nikki, she breathed. Why are you making this so much harder? Your father, he's heartbroken. My blood ran cold. Heartbroken? He threw me out of my own home based on a lie. Did you hear what I just said? I have proof. Proof doesn't matter right now, she said, her voice gaining a desperate edge. What matters is our family. This anger, this ugliness will tear us apart. If you would just apologize for the family, just apologize to your father and to your sister. We can put this behind us. I squeezed the phone so hard the plastic creaked. My own mother. She wasn't listening. She didn't want the truth. She wanted peace. And she was willing to sacrifice me to get it. The idea that this could all be solved by me admitting to a crime I didn't commit, just to smooth things over, was so profoundly unjust it stole my breath. It wasn't about a potential divorce or a family split. It was about maintaining the comfortable, established narrative at all costs. So you want me to say I'm a thief? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I want you to be my son again, she pleaded. Please, Nikki, just come home and apologize. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight with a grief so sharp it felt like swallowing glass. She wasn't my ally. No one was. I was completely and utterly alone. I can't do that, Mom, I finally managed to say. I didn't do it. I ended the call before she could reply. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and stared out at the empty parking lot. The hope I'd clung to was gone, replaced by a terrifying clarity. There would be no rescue. No one was coming to save me. If I was going to survive this, I was on my own. The first night in my car was brutal. Every shadow seemed menacing. Every passing car felt like a threat. I barely slept. By morning, my back ached and a deep, bone-chilling cold had set in. I knew I couldn't keep this up. There was only one person I could think of to call. Leo. Leo and I had been friends since kindergarten. He knew my family, he'd seen the dynamic firsthand for years, and he'd always been my reality check. He answered on the second ring. Dude, where are you? I called you like 5 times last night. In a choked, halting voice, I told him everything. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. When I finished, the only thing he said was, "Where are you right now? Send me your location." 20 minutes later, his beat-up truck pulled up next to my car. He didn't look shocked or pitiful. He just looked angry on my behalf. "Get in," he said. "You're staying with me." I tried to protest, but he cut me off. "My mom will kill me if she finds out I left you sleeping in your car. It's not a discussion. Let's go." Leo's house was small, warm, and a little chaotic, the complete opposite of the silent, museum-like home I grew up in. His mom, a kind woman with a no-nonsense attitude, took one look at my face, hugged me tightly, and pointed me toward the shower. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt a flicker of human warmth. But the safety of Leo's house was a small island in a growing sea of hostility. The news, or rather Clara's version of it, had spread like wildfire. My father had likely made a few calls, painting a picture of a troubled son who had finally gone too far. My phone started buzzing with texts from cousins and family friends. Some were sanctimonious offers to pray for me. Others were cold, telling me how disappointed they were. The worst came from within the company. I got an email from Mark, a manager in my department who had always been a rival. It was dripping with false sympathy. "Heard what happened, man. So sorry to hear it. Let me know if you need anything." I knew he was probably dancing on his desk, already measuring my office for new curtains. He was likely angling for the promotion he thought I was in line for. Out of desperation, I called my Aunt Carol, my dad's sister. She had always been the cool aunt, the one who seemed to see through my father's bluster. I hoped she would be an ally. Her voice was cautious. "Nicholas, I heard there was some trouble." I explained the situation, my voice pleading for her to believe me. She sighed heavily. "Listen, honey, your father is a difficult man, we all know that. But he's your father, and Clara is your sister. Family is complicated. My advice is to lay low, let him cool off, and then do what you have to do to make peace. I can't get involved in this. It's not my place." She didn't believe me, or worse, she didn't care if it was true. She just didn't want the drama. It was another door slammed in my face. Staying at Leo's was a temporary fix, but the outside world was closing in. The story was set. I was the villain. Clara was the victim. My family, my community, my professional life. It had all been poisoned. The isolation was a physical weight, pressing down on me, suffocating me. Leo's friendship was a lifeline, but I knew it wasn't enough to pull me back to shore. For the next week, I existed in a fog. Leo's mom insisted on feeding me, and Leo did his best to keep my spirits up. But I was sinking. I spent my days searching for jobs online, a futile effort when my last employer was my father, who had effectively blacklisted me as a thief. The $67 in my wallet was long gone. I was living on borrowed time and borrowed kindness. The turning point came on a Saturday night. Leo had been invited to a party, one of those big suburban backyard things hosted by a mutual acquaintance. I obviously was not invited. I told Leo to go, to have fun, that I'd be fine. I didn't want my misery to be his prison. He came back around 2 in the morning. I was awake, staring at the ceiling in the guest room. I heard him come in, and a minute later, my door creaked open. In the dim light from the hallway, I could see his face was pale, his expression tight with a strange mix of fury and excitement. "You are not going to believe this," he said, his voice a harsh whisper. He sat on the edge of the bed. Clara was there. My stomach clenched. Just hearing her name felt like a punch. "She was holding court, you know," he continued, his words coming faster now. "Surrounded by her little circle of friends. She'd had a few drinks. She was loud. And she was bragging." "Bragging about what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "About you," Leo said, his eyes boring into mine. "She was laughing about it, man. One of her friends asked if she was okay, after the family drama. And Clara, she just laughed and took a big sip of her margarita. She said, 'Please, I'm better than okay.' I finally got the office next to Dad's. Sometimes you have to take out the trash to keep the house clean. The cruelty of it, the casual, celebratory cruelty, knocked the wind out of me. "But that's not all," Leo said, leaning closer. Her friend looked confused and said something like, "But I thought he stole all that money?" And Clara, she lowered her voice a little, but I was close enough to hear. She said, "He didn't steal anything. He's too stupid to pull that off. I just gave Dad a reason to finally see what was in front of him all along. There's only one child in this family who's capable of running things. She said she taught you a lesson." Leo pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking. I couldn't just stand there. I pretended I was texting and I hit record. It's not great. It's noisy. But you can hear her. You can hear her admit it. He pressed play. Through the distorted sound of party music and chatter, I could hear her voice, clear as a bell, slurring slightly but unmistakable. Gave Dad a reason to finally see. Only one child, capable. It was a fragment. It wasn't a full confession. It wouldn't hold up in court with a lawyer. But it was everything. It was proof that I wasn't crazy. It was proof that this nightmare was real, orchestrated by my own sister. For the first time in weeks, the fog of despair began to lift, burned away by a white-hot, clarifying rage. The time for hiding and feeling sorry for myself was over. She had celebrated my destruction. Now I was going to orchestrate hers. The recording changed everything. It was a weapon, albeit an imperfect one. Leo and I listened to it a dozen times. The audio was murky, and she never explicitly said, "I framed him." A decent lawyer could tear it apart, claim it was taken out of context, that she was just drunk and talking trash. My father, in his state of willful blindness, would dismiss it instantly. Presenting it directly would be a foolish move. It would show my hand and likely result in more accusations of me being manipulative. No, this recording wasn't the solution. It was the fuel. "We can't use it to attack," I said to Leo, pacing back and forth in his living room. "We have to use it to build a stage. A stage where she'll be forced to perform. And this time, everyone will see the real show." My mindset shifted. The grief and shock were still there, but they were now packed down, compressed into a hard, diamond-like core of determination. I was no longer a victim waiting for rescue. I was a strategist. My first move was to reach out carefully. I still had a few allies inside the company, people on the factory floor and in the back office who knew my work ethic, who had seen Claire's corporate schmoozing up close and weren't impressed. I contacted Sarah, a woman in accounting who had been with the company for 20 years and had a quiet loyalty to me. I met her for coffee far from the office. I didn't tell her everything, just that I was trying to clear my name and needed to understand what was happening inside the company. She was cautious, but she agreed to help. She told me that since I'd left, Clara had been given free rein over my old department, and morale had plummeted. Mark was her new second-in-command, and together they were running things on a platform of fear and flashy presentations that lacked substance. But then Sarah gave me the key. "Your father is trying to close the Harrison deal," she said, lowering her voice. "It's that big partnership with Harrison Industries, the one you did all the initial groundwork on last year. Mr. Harrison is old school. He's all about integrity, family values. Your father is hosting a private dinner for him next Friday to finalize everything. It's the biggest deal of the year." A slow smile spread across my face. Mr. Harrison. I knew him. He'd always liked me. He appreciated my straightforward, no-nonsense approach. Something he once told me reminded him of my father in his younger days. He was a man of impeccable character, and his respect was one of the few things my father truly craved. This was it. This was the stage. It was perfect. It wasn't a messy family argument in the living room. It was a professional setting with millions of dollars on the line and an impartial, powerful witness. My father would be on his best behavior, desperate to project an image of a perfect, stable family business. He would be trapped by his own pride. The plan began to form in my mind, piece by piece. I didn't need to come in screaming with a bad recording. I just needed to show up. I just needed to ask the right questions. I would use their own sense of decorum and their desperation to close this deal as my leverage. Clara's arrogance was her greatest weakness. My father's pride was his. On Friday night, I was going to use both to burn their world to the ground. The week leading up to the dinner was the longest of my life. I operated with a singular, chilling focus. Leo lent me $200, his entire savings. Felt like blood money, and I swore I would pay him back tenfold. The first thing I did was get a haircut. I went to a cheap place, but it made a world of difference. The weeks of stress and sleeping in my car had left me looking haggard. I needed to look composed, not desperate. Next, I went to a thrift store and bought a suit. It was a dark navy, slightly outdated, but it fit well enough after some minor adjustments from a local tailor. I spent hours pressing it in Leo's laundry room, making sure every crease was perfect. This wasn't just clothing. It was armor. When I walked into that restaurant, I couldn't look like a homeless outcast. I had to look like the son of Martin Manufacturing's CEO. I had to look like I belonged there. The rest of my time was spent on preparation. I went to the library and used their computers to put together a thin, professional-looking file. Contained nothing new, no secret evidence. Instead, it was a compilation of my own work. My proposal for the equipment upgrade. The supplier contract I renegotiated. A summary of the accounting discrepancy I had discovered, presented not as an accusation, but as an unresolved operational query. The strategy was subtle. I wasn't going in there to accuse Clara of embezzlement. I was going in to discuss my abrupt departure from the company and the unresolved professional matters I had left behind. I would frame everything in the language of business, of concern for the company's future. I would be calm, respectful, and relentlessly logical. My target wasn't my father. I knew he was a lost cause, at least initially. My target was Mr. Harrison. I would be performing for an audience of one. I would lay out the facts of my contributions, the timeline of events, and the inconsistencies in the official story of my firing. I wouldn't need to call Clara a liar. I would simply present a reality in which her story made no logical sense. The night before the dinner, I laid the suit out on my bed. I placed the file next to it. I felt a strange sense of calm. The rage was still there, a hot coal in my chest, but it was controlled now, banked and ready to be used as fuel. I wasn't the same kid who had been thrown out of his house weeks ago. That kid was scared and confused. He still believed in the possibility of justice from his parents. The man who was going to walk into that restaurant tomorrow knew better. He knew that justice isn't given. It has to be taken. And I was ready to take it. The restaurant was exactly the kind of place my father loved. Old world, opulent, and suffocatingly quiet. Dark wood paneling, heavy velvet curtains, and waiters who moved with the silent, ghostly efficiency of butlers. I'd been here before, for birthdays and anniversaries. Tonight, it felt like enemy territory. I gave my old suit a final tug and walked in. The maitre d', a tall man with a severe face, intercepted me immediately. "Can I help you, sir?" His eyes flickered over me, a quick, professional appraisal that found me wanting. "I'm here to join the Martin party," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the chaos churning in my gut. He checked his list. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't see your name. I'm Nicholas Martin. It's a family matter." Before he could protest further, I saw them. They were in a private alcove at the back of the dining room. My father, holding a glass of wine, was in the middle of a story, his face flushed with bonhomie. My mother, elegant and tense, smiled a brittle smile. Clara, radiant in a designer dress, was laughing at something Mr. Harrison had said. And Mr. Harrison himself, a distinguished man with silver hair and shrewd eyes, was listening intently. I took a deep breath and walked toward them. The conversations died down, fork by fork, as I approached. It started with Clara. Her eyes widened, the smile freezing on her face. Then my mother saw me, and her hand flew to her throat, a tiny, strangled gasp escaping her lips. Finally, my father turned. The cheerful mask dropped. His face went from ruddy to pale in a heartbeat, then darkened with rage. "What in God's name are you doing here?" he hissed, his voice a low growl that cut through the restaurant's quiet murmur. Mr. Harrison looked from my father to me, his expression one of polite confusion. "Good evening, Dad, Mom, Clara," I said, my voice calm and even. I then turned to the guest of honor. "Mr. Harrison, it's a pleasure to see you again. I apologize for the interruption." "Security!" my father snapped, trying to flag down a waiter. "That won't be necessary," I said, placing my thin file on the table. "I'm not here to cause a scene. I am simply here as a concerned stakeholder in Martin Manufacturing to discuss a few unresolved matters before you finalize your partnership." Mr. Harrison raised an eyebrow, intrigued. He looked at my father. "Martin, what is this about? Is this your son?" My father's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching. He was trapped. He couldn't have me physically thrown out without creating a massive, embarrassing spectacle in front of the one man he needed to impress. My father ground out. And he is no longer associated with the company. That's one of the matters I'd like to discuss, I said smoothly, pulling up an empty chair from a nearby table and sitting down before anyone could stop me. My rather abrupt departure. You see, Mr. Harrison, my termination came just one day after I submitted a report on a significant accounting discrepancy I discovered. I was hoping my father could update me on the resolution. I slid a single piece of paper from the file across the table. It was the summary of the embezzlement with no names attached. Just numbers. My father's face was turning a dangerous shade of purple. This is neither the time nor the place. On the contrary, I said, my eyes fixed on Mr. Harrison. When a company is seeking a multimillion-dollar partnership, I believe its internal financial controls and HR policies are of the utmost importance. Don't you? Mr. Harrison didn't answer. He just picked up the paper, his expression unreadable. Clara was staring at me, her eyes filled with a venomous hatred. The carefully constructed piece of their evening was shattered. The show was about to begin. The silence at the table was thick enough to choke on. My father was sputtering, trying to regain control, dismissing my document as the ramblings of a disgruntled former employee. My mother stared at her plate as if it held the secrets to the universe. Mr. Harrison, however, was reading. He read the single page slowly, his brow furrowed in concentration. I pressed my small advantage. I also had some concerns about the capital expenditure plan for the next fiscal year. I said, directing my words again to Harrison, the proposal for the equipment upgrade. I just wanted to ensure my original cost-benefit analysis was being properly implemented. I slid another page across the table, a summary of my original proposal. That was Clara's initiative, my father snapped. It was brilliant. Indeed, I said, turning my gaze to my sister for the first time. It was a brilliant idea. So brilliant, in fact, that I had it 3 weeks before she did. Funny how that works. Clara's composure finally cracked. The charming, sophisticated facade crumbled, revealing the snarling, entitled brat underneath. You are pathetic, she spat, her voice low and trembling with rage. Coming in here, trying to ruin everything. You were fired because you're a thief. You stole from your own family. Did I? I asked, keeping my voice level. Or was that just a convenient story? A story to get rid of the only person who knew you were cooking the books in the marketing department. My father slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware jump. Enough! You will not speak to your sister that way. You are a disgrace, and I want you out of here now. His defense only emboldened her. Her fear was being replaced by a wave of righteous, arrogant fury. She believed in that moment that she was untouchable. My father would always protect her. She looked at me, a sneer twisting her beautiful features. You think these little papers can change anything? She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You think she gestured toward Mr. Harrison, cares about your pathetic little office dramas? You were always weak. You were always holding this family back. She leaned forward, her eyes blazing with a wild, triumphant light. The pressure of the last few weeks, the thrill of her victory, and the champagne she'd been drinking all combined into a spectacular, self-destructive explosion. You want to know the truth? She said, her voice rising, drawing the attention of the surrounding tables. Fine. Yes, I did it. I took the money and I planted the evidence. I framed you, because Dad needs an heir who is strong enough to protect this company. Not a soft, sentimental fool like you. I did what I had to do to protect our inheritance from you. The air was sucked out of the room. My father froze, his mouth half open. Mr. Harrison's eyes widened in disbelief. I just stared at her, a cold, grim satisfaction washing over me. She had done it. She had handed me my victory on a silver platter. But the real twist, the moment that truly changed everything, came from behind her. What did you just say? The voice was quiet, trembling, and utterly destroyed. Clara's triumphant expression faltered. She slowly turned around. Standing there, having just returned from the restroom, was our mother. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with a horror so profound it seemed to hollow her out from the inside. She had heard every single word. This is the moment that changed everything, the moment I finally got control of my life back. Thank you for staying with me until this point. You are amazing. Please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below, so I know you've journeyed with me this far. It not only helps more people find this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of my journey. The aftermath of Clara's confession was a tableau of silent horror. My mother stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes locked on her daughter. Clara's face had drained of all color, the arrogant fire extinguished, replaced by the dawning, panicked realization of what she had just done. My father looked as though he had been physically struck, his entire body rigid, his eyes darting between his daughter, his wife, and the ruin of his business deal. It was Mr. Harrison who broke the spell. He deliberately folded the paper I had given him, placed it in his breast pocket, and stood up. He adjusted his tie, his face a mask of cold, profound disappointment. "Martin," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a judge's sentence. "I came here tonight to celebrate a partnership between two families I thought shared the same values. Integrity, honesty. It's clear I was mistaken." He looked from Clara's terrified face to my father's stunned one. "I will be withdrawing my offer. We will not be doing business together. I suggest you get your house in order." He gave me a single brief nod, a gesture of respect that felt more validating than a lifetime of my father's praise, and then he turned and walked out of the restaurant without a backward glance. His departure was like pulling the pin from a grenade. My mother let out a strangled sob and sank into her chair, burying her face in her hands. My father finally snapped out of his paralysis, his gaze falling on Clara. For the first time in my life, I saw him look at her without adoration. I saw him look at her and see the monster he had created. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Clara started to babble, the words tumbling out in a desperate, incoherent stream. "I did it for you, Daddy. For the company." He wasn't strong enough. I had to. But her words were meaningless now. The lie was exposed, and the truth was a harsh, ugly thing that had cost them everything. The restaurant manager was hovering nearby, his face a mixture of anxiety and morbid curiosity. The perfect evening had imploded, and we were sitting in the wreckage. I stood up. I hadn't said a word since she confessed, and I didn't need to. The truth was doing its work. I looked at my family, my weeping mother, my disgraced father, my ruined sister, and I felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, not even triumph. Just a vast, quiet emptiness. The fight was over. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them to sift through the ashes of the world they had built. For the first time in weeks I could breathe. Took them 2 days to contact me. I was back at Leo's, recounting the entire, insane evening. We were both still reeling. My phone rang, and the caller ID said, "Father." My first instinct was to ignore it. Leo just nodded at the phone. "You have all the power now, man. Use it." I answered. His voice was different. The booming, authoritative tone was gone. He sounded like an old, tired man. "Nicholas, we need to talk. Can you come to the house?" "No," I said, the words simple and firm. "We can meet on neutral ground. The coffee shop on Main Street. 1 hour." I hung up before he could argue. They were already there when I arrived. They looked diminished, smaller, sitting at a tiny table in the corner. My father's shoulders were slumped. My mother's eyes were red and swollen. Clara was not with them. My mother started to speak, her voice thick with tears. "Nikki, we are so sorry." My father just nodded, staring into his coffee cup. I was a fool," he mumbled. "A blind fool. I let the silence hang in the air. I didn't offer them comfort or forgiveness. I waited. "We want you to come home," my mother pleaded. "We want to fix this." "Fixing this isn't about me coming home," I said, my voice cold and businesslike. "Fixing this is about justice. And justice has terms." They both looked at me, waiting. "First," I said, "a public apology, not a vague Facebook post. I want you, Dad, to post a full retraction of the accusations against me on your personal page and the company's official page. I will write it and you will post it verbatim." My father flinched, but he nodded. The public humiliation was a bitter pill, but he knew he had to swallow it. "Second, I am to be reinstated at the company, not as an operations manager, as vice president of operations, with full oversight of my old department and a salary commensurate with that position. My contract will be reviewed by my own lawyer." Again he nodded. "Third," I said, my eyes hardening, "Clara, she needs to be held accountable. She is to be removed from the company, effective immediately, and her share of the future inheritance. That needs to be revisited. I want it legally documented that my portion will be protected from any further attempts at manipulation." My mother gasped at the mention of removing Clara. "Nicholas, she's your sister, and she tried to ruin my life," I countered, my voice unyielding. "These are my terms. All of them. You either accept them, or you will never see or hear from me again. And I will make it my life's mission to ensure the entire business world knows exactly what kind of family values Martin Manufacturing is built on." I stood up, leaving them with the ultimatum. The choice was theirs. For the first time in my life, I was the one setting the rules. 6 months later, the world looked very different. My father had agreed to all my terms. The public apology he posted went viral in our local community. A humiliating but necessary act of contrition that effectively cleared my name. The gossip mill turned its attention from my supposed crime to Clara's actual one. Walking back into the company felt surreal. I wasn't the same person who had left. I moved with a confidence I never knew I possessed. Mark, my old rival, couldn't look me in the eye and tendered his resignation within a week. The employees who had known the truth all along treated my return with a quiet, respectful approval. My first order of business was to contact Mr. Harrison. I requested a meeting, just the two of us. I didn't ask him to reconsider the deal. Instead, I laid out my new vision for the company. A vision built on transparency, accountability, and the kind of solid, no-nonsense operational efficiency that he valued. I presented a detailed plan to rectify the issues I discovered, and I took full responsibility for the company's past failures. He was impressed. 2 months later, we signed a new, even better partnership agreement. That victory was sweeter than any personal apology. It was proof, written in black ink on a contract worth millions, that I was capable. I had saved the family business not just from my sister's corruption, but from my father's blindness. My relationship with my parents was a work in progress. My father treated me with a new, cautious respect. The old, booming authoritarian was gone, replaced by a man who seemed to be reevaluating his entire life. He started listening to my ideas in meetings. He started asking for my opinion. It was strange and sometimes uncomfortable, but it was a start. My mother tried harder. She called me regularly, not to push for a false sense of peace, but just to talk. We had long, difficult conversations where she admitted her own culpability, her weakness in the face of my father's domineering personality. She confessed that she had known, deep down, that the dynamic was wrong for years but had been too afraid to challenge it. Her apologies felt genuine, born of real regret. There was a long road ahead, but for the first time, it felt like we were walking it together. Clara was gone. After being forced out of the company, she had moved to a different city. I heard through the grapevine that she was working some low-level marketing job. We hadn't spoken since that night in the restaurant. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty, but I didn't. Her exile was the price of justice. The house felt quieter, calmer without her manipulative presence constantly stirring the pot. The silence was peaceful. I was rebuilding the company, my family was rebuilding its foundations, and I was rebuilding myself. The scars were still there, but they were no longer open wounds. They were reminders of the battle I had fought and won. One evening, about 8 months after the showdown, I came home from a long day at the office to find a thick envelope in my mailbox. There was no return address, but I recognized the elegant, looping handwriting immediately. It was from Clara. My first impulse was to throw it away, to burn it without reading it. I didn't need her excuses or her venom in my life. But curiosity, a strange, lingering remnant of our shared childhood, got the better of me. I sat down at my kitchen table and slid it open. It wasn't a hate-filled rant, nor was it a simple apology. It was a long, rambling 10-page letter. In it, she tried to explain herself. She wrote about our childhood, but her memories were warped, twisted through the lens of her own narrative. She didn't see a brother who was constantly overlooked. She saw a brother who was soft, unfocused, and lacked the killer instinct needed to survive in the world our father had built. "You were always so caught up in being liked, in being fair," she wrote. "You never understood that in business, and in life, there are winners and losers. Dad built an empire, and I saw you, with your sentimentality and your bleeding heart, as the single greatest threat to its survival. You would have run it into the ground within 5 years." The letter revealed a shocking, delusional level of perceived responsibility. In her mind, she hadn't acted out of simple jealousy or greed. She had performed a necessary, albeit painful, act of corporate surgery. She saw herself as the family's protector, the only one with the strength to make the hard decisions. Framing me wasn't a crime. It was a strategic maneuver to save the family legacy from its weakest link, me. She had convinced herself that taking my inheritance, my job, and my home was a righteous act. It was for the greater good of the family name. "I knew you would be hurt," the letter continued, "but I thought you would eventually land on your feet, maybe find a quiet job somewhere you were better suited for. I never imagined you would fight back like that. I underestimated your stubbornness. That was my only mistake. Not the lie, not the betrayal, not the complete lack of morality. Her only mistake, in her eyes, was miscalculating my reaction." The letter was the final, missing piece of the puzzle. It gave a terrifying, pathetic logic to her madness. She wasn't just a simple villain. She was the hero of her own twisted story, a corporate savior who had been tragically misunderstood. She lacked the self-awareness to see the profound selfishness and cruelty of her actions. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt a profound, chilling pity for her. She was trapped in a prison of her own making, a world where love was confused with control, and strength was measured by ruthlessness. I walked outside to my barbecue pit, struck a match, and dropped the letter onto the coals. I watched as the edges curled and blackened, her elegant script turning to gray ash and smoke before disappearing into the night sky. And with it, I finally let her go. It's been over a year now. From the window of my new office, the one that used to be my father's, I can see the whole city spread out below. The factory is humming along, more productive and profitable than ever. The Martin Manufacturing name, once tarnished, is now associated with a story of resilience and integrity. My father is semi-retired now. He still comes in a few days a week, but he's more of a consultant and elder statesman. The fire and fury are gone, replaced by a quiet pride in what I've accomplished. We don't talk much about the past, but we don't have to. The respect in his eyes when he looks at me now is the validation I spent my whole life chasing, but ironically no longer need. My relationship with my mother is the best it's ever been. Freed from the need to constantly placate my father, she has found her own voice. We have dinner once a week, and we talk about everything and nothing. She is, in her own quiet way, healing alongside me. I never heard from Clara again after that letter. Sometimes I wonder where she is, what she's doing. But the thought is fleeting. She is a chapter of my life that is now closed. I have come to realize that what she did, as horrific as it was a strange and painful gift. Being thrown out of that house, being stripped of everything I thought defined me. My name, my job, my inheritance, forced me to discover who I really was. It forced me to build a foundation of my own, one that wasn't dependent on my father's approval or my place in the family hierarchy. They say the hottest fires forge the strongest steel. I was thrown into the fire, and I didn't just survive. I was remade. I learned that true strength isn't about being ruthless or loud. It's about resilience. It's about standing up for the truth, even when your voice shakes. It's about knowing your own worth, even when the people who are supposed to love you most refuse to see it. I have forgiven them, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. The anger, the bitterness, that was a prison, and I was done serving time for someone else's crime. Looking out at the city lights, I don't see a kingdom I inherited. I see something I earned, something I rebuilt from the ashes. And it's a much better view. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it has touched you in some way. Have you ever had to fight to be seen by your own family? Please, share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Your support means the world.